This happened to me in October of 1983 in Santa Cruz County, Arizona. I grew up in the desert. I know there are some who think the whole gargoyle stories are cute or even funny or stupid. But if you do some research, there is a reason that these statues are on ancient buildings and they are considered the devil's offspring. Gargoyles are evil. They are not animals. They are not human. They are something else. Something much worse. I saw the desert gargoyle in 1983 after a bunch of satanic worshippers were chased off the old Hanson Ranch in South Arizona. We went out that night to clean up the beer cans scattered all over the place and put out the campfire after the police had escorted them off the property. I already felt like something was watching me. I thought I saw something moving, and there it was in the big mesquite tree, staring down at me with the devil's yellow eyes. I ran screaming to my daddy, and he got a shotgun. That thing came into our house. My daddy shot him straight in the chest. The thing just laughed. The laugh of the devil. Then it smashed out our kitchen wall and flew away. The next night, Mitchell Rogers was found decapitated in his bed. The joke around town was it was suicide, and that's because the police were part of the occult too. Daddy boarded up the house and we moved to Roseville. I never forget that thing from that night. It was the devil's offspring, and it lives in the desert. Beware the Sonoran Desert. I will never go back there. Story 2. I love our gargoyle, Gargzy. He is nothing to fear. I have known about it since I was a kid. The old-timers used to tell stories about him. The reason he is able to exist is because those of us who live here have respect. But occasionally, there is a jackass, some loudmouth knucklehead who thinks the world revolves around him. But our gargoyle settles up with them soon enough, and they are gone. One way or the other. I'm happy to talk about it because, 1, I think it is possible to live in peace among all creatures. And to me, the gargoyle is no different from a rattlesnake. Just another animal. And, just like the rattler, step on it and you're in big trouble. But I never heard of the gargoyle hurting innocents. Oh, maybe he puts out a warning, but never hurt anybody as far as I know. And no one will believe me. So what's the harm? If you tell people about this thing, it actually ends up protecting the thing because nobody thinks it's real. And 3, nobody, least way, nowadays is interested in going into the no man's land, part of the Sonoran Desert where our friend lives, and seek him out. Maybe in 1,000 years, but I am sure the gargoyle will still be able to hide somewhere between there and his caves, or do whatever else he needs to in order to deal with it. He has been around a lot longer than us. And to answer your question, yes, I did see the gargoyle, in person. Only one time though, and it was a sight to behold. My wife and me live in the Sonoran, and I always hope to see it show up in our backyard. But the one and only time I ever saw it was on a drive through one of the national reservations in Papago, Arizona. We were going from Tucson to Gila Bend. My friend Benny and I were taking the long way home. We were on 86 between 3 points when Benny had to take a piss. Maybe somewhere around Cells on old Indian Route 15. He gets out to piss, I get out and walk around. And as anybody who knows that area will tell you, if you drive through there at night, the cactus look like people lining the desert. And surely enough, that night was no exception. Then, I see one of the cactus about 50 feet in front of me walking due west. Tremendous pointed wings and ram horns. "Benny," I said. "Hey, Ben, look over there." "I'll be goddamned," he said. I whispered to him, "She's a beauty, ain't she?" "A thing of beauty," he said. Benny zipped up. The gargoyle jumped up into the sky and was gone. That's it. The one and only time I ever saw our gargoyle. But I hope it's not the last. Story 3. A group of us were trying to cross the border from Mexico to California, but the guy who was taking us said he needed more money. What are you going to do when something like that happens? We were completely at the mercy of the coyotejes. The coyoteje that was taking us to California supposedly had a good reputation. He could get you over the border, but also get you in the hands of some friendlies on the other side, and get you set up in a city in Arizona, or even California, and also get you set up with where the jobs were. That was why I paid 3,500 American dollars, and the others, I found out, paid similar amounts. It was a lot to pull together, but since this was after 9/11, the coyoteje was much more involved in telling us things that have changed, and it was much together, and on this night, we had to adjust. We were going over the border in Arizona instead of California. The insurance the coyoteje took out on each of us was our family. That is, none of us could pay the extra 1,000 he was demanding once we were out in the desert, so he reminded us the information he had about our families. I didn't really care where we went in, as long it was the Estados Unidos. Me and 3 others were standing in the night desert, while the coyoteje went to talk to another guy who pulled in a big truck with lots of extra lights mounted on it. We could not hear what they were saying, but we could see them laughing. It felt sinister. His friend drove away. Then the coyoteje came back and told us, we have to leave now. He was an obnoxious, mean con artist of a man, and I hated him. We started walking forward in the dark. He was back there, behind us, singing and talking shit. The 4 of us began talking to one another. We were wondering how long the walk would be. Then we noticed that we have not heard the asshole in quite a while. We stopped. We called out. He was gone. Just gone. And there we were, stuck in the dark, abandoned in the desert at night, on the Mexican side of the border. We didn't know what to do. This coyoteje made all these promises and threats, and bragged as long as he was with us. Then he abandoned us in the middle of nowhere? After calling and searching, we decided to band together and take a risk for the border. We walked and walked and walked. One of the guys with us started to cry. I don't blame him. It is hard when you are walking in the dark and have no idea where you are or how far you're going. But we kept walking. I am in the front and something falls right in front of me. The first thing I thought was Border Patrol, and I jumped. Then we all held still. I looked down. I saw something on the ground. The moon was out, so I could see something. I looked at it for a while. Then I approached it. Maybe some others are out here crossing, and I just threw something to get our attention, I thought. I got up closer and could see something written on the thing that had landed in front of me. It was the tattoo from our coyoteje. It was on his shoulder, and that was his arm I was looking at. There was screaming and panic. The group of us took off running and hid in some bushes by the rocks. It could be a lot of things, and all of them bad. Debt, revenge, drugs, territory. And as we crouched behind the rocky bushes, we saw something skid into the sand near the arm. Then the dust cleared, and we could see it was a giant man with bat wings. It grabbed the arm, made a sound like a screeching bird, and flew off into the sky. None of us made a sound. Then we got up wide-eyed and confused, but continued going on in the direction we had started. Only now walking faster and always looking up with fear and searching the dim terrain for possible refugees in case they should appear. About an hour later, we ran into another group who were crossing and joined them. We all did make it across. I knew there were many dangerous animals in that desert, so I was really more worried about what may happen to my family if the coyoteje never showed up or got his money. But no one in my family ever had a problem or heard from anybody. I guess they chalked it up to something else, or maybe thought he stole from them. So it was more on him, the Kyotohe, and his family. As for the crew, I never saw any of them again. We spread out once we got inside Arizona. I never went back to Mexico. I still send money back to my family, and none of my family ever had a problem from anyone. There was so much life and death going on that night. Even the monsters of myth had to take a back seat to other realities. But many times in the years since, I have thought about what I saw, what we saw, and I wonder if the others have ever told anyone about it. Story 4. I have heard about the Sonoran gargoyle, but I do not believe in it. I am sure it is just a giant bat, or bats. I used to watch the bats leaving their caves at night, south of Tucson. It is a cool thing, but it is also awe-inspiring when you see hundreds of thousands of bats flying into the setting sun like that. It can make your mind play tricks on you. One time in particular, me and my dad and my friend took a drive down to the bat caves around sunset, and then they start pouring out. There's the sound and the sky goes black. Yeah, it's wild. So, it was on that one time we spotted on Lumpy Shadow climb out of the cave and started scaling up toward the knoll. You could really just make out the basic shape. And because those bats have smashed up snouts, it can kinda look like a human face, especially in the setting sun or even the dark. In our case, we were watching this thing climb. It is just a moving pile of wings and elbows. Then it squatted on the cliff and sat there. And seriously, it looked like a ram with wings, but with a human face. Because the sun hits the face on those bats, and it makes it look like it has a bow nose, you know, like a human face. So when we were there watching it, jumped into the air and took off flying among the other bats. But its wings were just not fitting. The big bat's wings were taking wider swoops, slower, more powerful ones. And you could clearly make it out, even among the bat swarm. And when it was flying like that, I could see where a person might mistake the shape of a big bat for something else with legs, arms, or a tail. Just an illusion. But I can understand how someone can make that mistake. To me, the bigger issue is the fact that there are bats in the Sonoran Desert with wingspans bigger than condors. That is probably more dangerous than a gargoyle, right? Story 5. We like to go camping, and we were really into something called extreme vacations. An extreme vacation for us was to take on a challenge, face it, overcome it. Sometimes it was dangerous. Sometimes it was crazy, but we loved it. Sometimes it was also extremely stupid. That was the case when we took a weekend trip to Mexico. Our friend dropped us off at El Elegante crater, with the intention of returning to pick us up at destination unknown when we would call him sometime later on that weekend. We got there early in the AM and had all of our high-tech gear, which gave us a false sense of security. And around 10 AM, we left the crater and headed northwest. We were laughing, joking, drinking, and cavalierly passing multiple signs that warned Peligro. We decided we could actually hike north to the 2, just south of the Arizona border, and have him retrieve us near the Cabeza Perita National Wildlife Refuge. Yeah, we were beating our chests and felt like there was no terrain we could not handle with authority. Idiots. Nevertheless, somehow, and I am still not entirely sure how, our GPS went screwy. So we navigated by the sun for more than 2 hours, only to end up in a mess of craggy crevices where we needed to keep going left. Finally, we decided to commit to a short walk to the south in order to access what looked like a crescent plain that would take us back north. We had plenty of water and solid gear, but it was not long before we completely lost all phone signal. I distinctly remember 3 o'clock, because it was hotter than hell, and although we had a lot of sunblock, there was absolutely no shade. No immediate shade, I should say. No shade as far as I could see. I was not so extreme anymore, as it was just scary. And the more we walked, the more anxious we got. I could tell Jeff was getting nerved up. We had both stopped joking about 2 hours ago, and about an hour ago stopped talking altogether. Then we got into an argument. That is always a good idea in those situations. Jeff wanted to go straight north, but I could see only rough terrain north and wanted to go northeast, especially as I knew northeast was more likely to lead us back to people, or more likely toward Arizona. He told me, "We don't have time to fuck around," he snapped. I knew we had to keep it cool, because the desert is not the place to get hysterical. North is safer, we have to play it safe now, he articulated more calmly. Then we heard a rattle. Jeff jumped back just as I looked over, and I actually saw a large rattler striking at him, coming right off the ground with more than half of its body. It missed, but the rattle continued. We both started circling and heard more rattling. Then realized we were all surrounded by these snakes. We were standing in a dip between hills. The valley was dusty, dry, and filled with rattlers. I think that would qualify as a snake pit. Jeff got his pack off and immediately started using one of the aluminum strap poles to toss away the few snakes right around him. I did the same. "There are hundreds," Jeff said. Jeff looked up as we both considered how we could hike out of here. Even though we had flashlights with us, no one wants to navigate a snake pit in the dark, and especially in the short valley we had found ourselves. I distinctively remember that long afternoon shadow falling over the west ridge. It covered half of our options in growing darkness. That was nerve-wracking. I still have nightmares about that. What a horrible position to be in. Fortunately, we were able to draw closer to the north slope of the brush and cactus where the rattler invasion seemed to thin out. We took a breath. We could see better as portions of the flat rock exposed empty, safe swatches. So that is where we went, and just above the snake trap, we sat down on the stone and gathered ourselves momentarily. That was when I saw something scrawled on the rock. At first, I felt good because I thought vandalism equals civilization, and at that point, civilization was the priority. But after I pointed it out to Jeff and began sweeping it off, he said to me, "If we run into people out here, it could be bad. We need to get moving." Jeff stood up as I finished brushing off the image. It was only a drawing with an arrow above it. The drawing looked like a flying man with horns, tail, and disproportionately large teeth, and the arrow pointed to a crack in the rock formation, directly in front of us. Well, someone must have been here and survived, so I think we'll be okay, I told Jeff. Jeff came back and took a look at the drawing. I think for a moment we both forgot about the bad turns of the day, and were just fascinated by this image. Something so simple in such an incongruous place. Scary, intriguing, at most. Jeff kept looking at the rock and back at the drawing. Then he looked at me. "How old do you think it is? The drawing?" he asked me. "Man, I don't know. It's hard to tell. It looks like old staining the scratches of the rock, and there's no telling how you could even know," I started. "But somebody spent some time chipping it in there," I finished. I took several pictures of it, along with shots of the immediate rock formations. The image was scratched into a flat, exposed portion of a very large rock layer, so it was not something we could just pick up and take back with us. We probably would not have anyway, because we learned not to disturb places we would venture into, but it would have been tempting because it was surreal, and something I did not want to leave to a portion of the desert that I would probably not be able to ever locate again. But I did immediately try to deduce how I marked the area by the best means I could without the GPS. Sort of a substitute, high-tech bread crumble trail. As all of this was going through my head, Jeff just asked, "What do you think? Should we?" as he nodded at the stone crevice. I was surprised. He was recently visibly panicked, but now felt, as did I, that we had suddenly found the purpose of wandering lost in the sonoran, to see what was in that hole. "Fuck it," I said. "Let's do it." And we started walking towards the cave. "I gotta know what's in there." "Yeah, what is in there?" Jeff smiled, and we started stumbling over the rough surface toward the countersunk crevice opening. We were lapping it up just as we both began crouching into all four positions to descend. Then we heard a chilling sound. A cackle. A true-to-true life cackle. From a hole in the deep desert earth. We heard it echo up from the deep down inside that dark slit. We both stopped and sat down. We listened. "Wow," Jeff said, moving his jaw back and forth in consideration. "That sounds like something is alive down there," I whispered. "Yeah," Jeff agreed and then peeked over the edge and waited. We took a look around. The sky was starting to turn orange. Then we heard the sound below us again. This time much of the echo was gone, and the sound was much louder. Whatever it was, it had moved closer to the opening, and the cackle now became a scraping sound, as though the rake was being drawn across the fence. We both jumped up. "We are not prepared for this," Jeff said. I agreed. We immediately began walking quickly north. We walked and ran, jogged and ran, fast walked and sprinted, climbed and stumbled. The whole time we were looking back and squinting. A couple times I thought I saw something, as did Jeff, but really, I believe it was just fear. As the sun met the horizon, our phone signal came back as we neared the 2 east. We called Edgar and he picked us up about an hour and a half later. I don't know what lived in that hole, but whatever it is, I think it selected that particular place for a reason. We were probably part of only a handful of humans who had ever wandered there in the past century. Kudos to you, flying man. Story 6. I am Navajo. My grandfather was an elder with the Navajo Nation. The res extends through 3 states, as they say. I lived with my uncle in Arizona, that area of reservation. I worked at one of the places he had in the south, near Flagstaff. I guess the best part of my working for my uncle was the interaction I had with outsiders. Some of the tourists were distasteful idiots, but the good people made it worth it. Probably about the way life goes. The desert is a pretty bleak place, but when it is the only thing you get to know it well, and you begin to fear everything else. When I was in my later teens, I ventured off the res. I looked up a distant cousin, Mai. He lived south of Phoenix, closer to Tucson. He was so happy to see me. I was happy that he was happy. His mother lived in a trailer, and she was not happy to see me. But I did not take it personally, because she was not happy to see anyone. It's funny because my cousin was years off the res, but seemed much more dedicated to tradition than me. Maybe because he romanticized it, while I was still feeling the reality of it. But he would use terms that I did not even know. He asked if I would help him with the sin for his mom. Then he explains that she needs a post put in her driveway. I asked him if he loved the res so much that why did he leave. He said it was not his choice, and we got into this whole thing about his dad. The conversation was something that dragged on, so we went on to something else. I asked him about his school. He said it was good. I asked him what they called him. He told me, Mai. I was surprised. He never denied anything about his heritage. He even maintained a tiny little pathetic line of hair on his lip, true to his Navajo name, Coyote, and in human form he looked like a man with a mustache. But Mai was given his name because his mother said he was clever about being born when he wanted to be born, on his own schedule, and always finding a clever means to get what he wanted as a baby. As he got older, his father told him his name suited him because Mai had a power only known to him. A power to get what he wanted by getting you to laugh with him until it was too late to realize what he was up to. That is how we started talking about the old legends and so forth. Really, I expected more, but when I got to their place, I may as well have been back on the res, because Mai was much more into the old ways than me, and they lived in such a skeletal poor place. The only thing to do was go to the nearby gas station and eat slim beef jerky, watch local TV, or hike the desert. Not much of a departure from the res. After 2 days, I was ready to go back. I loved Mai very much, but I was just getting bored. I think I expected a different world, but I just got more of the same. Bored. Boring. Then Mai asked me about our grandfather. I told him, he's as old as the rocks. He responded with, I saw the waiting devil. Oh no, not that, I told him. It is true, cousin, he calmly said. Mai then shared with me how he saw the waiting devil one night. It made me laugh because it was such a story that our grandfather always told with much passion. And now, here was Mai living it out for him. Why? I asked him. Why did you never bust out and go to Phoenix or Tucson? He just ignored me. You know, we don't have a lot to do out here, cousin, he told me. Really, I hadn't noticed, I smiled back to him. I remember the story about the desert here he told us. I remember he warned my mother before he left. He looked at me. He was right, cousin. It's not just a metaphor or a legend. It's real. I walked away from him at the time. We had been sitting in his mom's trailer eating stale pretzels, and I was just tired of it. So I walked down to the gas station and pulled some coins to get a Pepsi and some Lays. By the time I had wandered back, Mai had even gotten out of his chair. The first thing he said to me was, I could show you where it lives. After some heated arguing and awkward apologies, I made myself excited to go trekking with him in a part of the desert rocks, there to see this thing our grandfather calls the waiting devil. By the time the sun went down, I was even feeling guilty that I had been so combative with my cousin. He was letting me stay there for free and never asked anything of me. Yeah, I thought, maybe this will be fun. Around 10 p.m., and we had already drank the 6-pack of Budweiser his mother brought home from her job. We were laughing and making fun of our family, trying to find our own way through ignorance on a path of arrogance. About an hour later, we were in the desert under moonlight. We had been walking in the sand, which gets old real fast. Then we end up on flat rock and walk some more. When? I demanded. Soon, he whispered back. It is worth it. Then we are in a valley, and then a crevice, then a cave, and the smell was so overwhelming. Bat shit, I told him. I know that smell very well. I hope you did not bring me out on a moonlit walk to see bats. I can see bats every day of the week back on the res, I grumbled. Then we reach a clearing over a plateau. It was beautiful in the moonlight, even for someone who grew up in the desert. What a view. Then Mai opens his backpack and throws me a beer. Okay, now I feel better, I laughed. We started talking about girls at his school. I told him maybe I would move to Phoenix and go to college there someday on scholarship. I told him maybe I would move to Phoenix and go to college there someday on a scholarship I had heard about. Then he gets all old world on me. I came here, to this place a few years ago, to kill myself. I got drunk. I scored some drugs. I laid down. He stopped. He drank. He waited, and then spoke in a whisper. Then I saw it. Then he looked at me. I saw it. Why? I started. It always has to go underground with you? He said, Look, you see it there? I was half laughing when I looked up to one of the far-away red rocks towering in the night sky, and I saw it. I saw a man-dragon flying in the distance, over the empty desert. I remember, I sat up and I stared. The waiting devil, he said, then took a drink of beer. I told you, cousin. He was silent. You still think they are all dumb stories? I started asking him all kinds of questions, but I mostly remember wanting to know, how did you know it was here? Yeah, he said casually. I've only seen it now, in October, at around this time. As the waiting devil disappeared into the rocks, he explained, "It was October when I first saw it. That sad, sad night. And even though I looked for it at other times, I never saw it at any other time. Only that next year. The same month, October. I don't know why. It was unreal to watch that thing our grandfather had always talked about. But there it was, landing on the face of the red rock and crawling into a crack on the side. No one will bother it there. It knows that. This is protected land, cousin." He drank some more. And who would ever believe anything anyone says when they live in a trailer? Or on the res, I agreed. He was right. He was telling us straight, cousin. He stared. The waiting devil lives in the rocks of the desert sunset. Yeah, he was right. I nodded. I moved to Phoenix that next year. Mai and his mother moved to Texas a few months after that. I was never able to find that spot where he took me again, though I tried in vain twice. Maybe some things are best left unable to find forever. I didn't really want to share my experience due to potential negative feedback, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I was much younger, probably about 12 years old, and I remember I was at school at the time. We have a larger playground outside of our school that extends into a field and then goes on towards some woods. We were in the middle of math class or something else boring. I was looking out the window because, like I said, I was bored, and I saw a weird shape that I couldn't make out fully what it was. It looked huge. It was all black and seemed disproportionate to what a normal person is supposed to be like. I could not really make out any specific shapes or details other than it just being a big black shape. It was in the field, coming towards the playground and the school. The scary thing is, it just looked like a shapeless blob of black coming towards us. The other thing that was weird is that it didn't have any legs. It was floating off the ground. It slowly hovered its way towards the playground, and then, just like that, seemed to vanish in thin air. I was watching it the entire time, and I couldn't make out where it had gone. This scared me and made me not want to go back to school, although no one else saw it, and I never saw this again. I'm not sure what it was, but I know those woods back by the school go back quite a ways. I wanted to know if anyone else had a similar experience at all, or am I just crazy? I live at the very top of a mountainside grade. Basically, to get to my house, you have to take a really long, winding road that goes up from the highway for about 20 miles until you hit this grade, and that takes you up the side of a mountain. Being a mountainside, it's pretty curvy and bends all over the place. The beautiful part is the scenery. If you look out to your right side as you're going up, you get to see all the forest and valley of where I live. It's breathtaking, and I never get tired of it. However, this night shook me to the core. I was driving up this grade, and it was later at night. It was a full moon, so there was light outside. The night itself was pretty clear, no real clouds in the sky. When it's light out like this at night, you could still see the valley pretty well due to the moonlight. As I'm reaching the top of the grade, there's a couple of sharp bends in the road. I'm approaching one of the last bends on the grade, and before I do, I see this large black shape sitting on the guardrail of the road. I thought to myself, what the hell is that? Maybe someone stuck something up on the guardrail. It was this big black mass that was just perched right there on the railing. I began to slow down, and even when my headlights hit it, I couldn't make out any details other than it was some big black mass of a shape. I slowed down, and as I approached it a little closer, suddenly this thing spreads open its wings, sticks out its claws and glares right at me. I slammed on my brakes and I sat in horror, looking at this thing. Again, my headlights were right on this thing, and it's like it was absorbing the light. It was so jet black. It had huge bat-like wings, shorter arms that looked like they had talons of some sort, and humongous glowing red eyes. I never saw a mouth or anything, but it just stared right at me. I began sobbing out of fear that this would come after me and hurt me. After a moment and an intense stare down, this thing flies out towards the valley, off into the night, letting out a horrible scream. It sounded like a demonic hawk mixed with a woman being murdered in cold blood. I watched it fly off into the night at incredible speed. I've lived out here for a while, and I've never seen that before, let alone know something like that even exists. I probably sat there for 5 minutes before I continued on driving, just frozen in sheer terror. I don't know what I encountered, but I'm certain it was from the pits of hell itself. I'm pretty sure I had some weird encounter with what some could only describe as the Jersey Devil. I was never really a big believer in all that nonsense until what I had experienced just a couple of weeks ago. I was hiking through the Pine Barrens when, only a short ways in, I started to get a weird feeling, like I was being stalked by a predator. I keep a weapon on me at all times, so I'm not too worried. I begin to hear rustling up in the trees, so I look up to it, and about 50 feet up, on a huge branch, is this horse devil-looking monstrosity glaring down at me. It must have been angry that I discovered it, because it let out this nasty howl, and jumped down and spread its wings and flew down right at me as if it was coming to grab me. I practically pooped my pants on the spot. I was so terrified. After that swooped down and it missed me and flew up out of the forest and flew away out of the area, I heard it let out another nasty howl. It was unlike anything I have ever heard from any animal ever. I don't know why it missed me, but it did. And God only knows what would have happened if it would have actually gotten a hold of me. Would it have taken me back up to its lair in hell and eaten me alive? If you look up depictions of Jersey Devil, what I saw resembles that. It was just far more evil looking than any drawing could have been. I'm convinced that this thing came from hell itself. I felt the hatred coming off of this thing, and its eyes burned deep into my soul. I will never forget them, and you can count me out for any future Pine Barrens adventures. Hi, what lurks beneath. I got a story for you. This one happened to me and my cousin back last August. My cousin lives on the reservation, specifically the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. I was visiting for a few weeks, as I usually do every summer. On this particular night, we believed that what we encountered was a skinwalker. We were hanging outside, having a bonfire. It was pretty late at night, probably closer to 1 in the morning, and him and I were staying up drinking beer and just talking. As time went on, we began to get strange feelings, like there was something sinister out in the darkness waiting for us. We began to get uncomfortable, but we chalked it off to it just being our nerves. His trailer was only about 100 feet away, and he had a porch light, which did not illuminate much, but it at least provided a light to walk back to. Well, besides the bonfire. Things did not get any better, though. We began to hear scuffling and heavy panting and breathing sounds just beyond the light of the fire, trailing us. We began to feel more and more uncomfortable, and that's when we started to see things. My cousin started staring beyond me, saying he could see the shape of a large coyote or a man behind me, and we would turn around and look, but nothing would be there. He swears whatever this was circling us and not getting in the light of the fire. He started panicking and mentioned out loud if he thought we were being stalked by a skinwalker. He knows better than that. I told him to hush and that we shouldn't discuss such things. For those that are not aware, It is pretty much forbidden to talk about those things because it draws them into you. So if you don't mention them, they generally leave you alone. As soon as he mentions Skinwalker, this thing growls, and it sounds like it's only 5 feet behind us. That was enough for me and my cousin. We bolted for his trailer and made it there in like 5 seconds. We ran in to lock the doors and grabbed weapons and waited for this thing to come by the house. It never did, but we could hear it out there in the darkness, wandering around, howling and making bizarre noises. What a night. I'll never forget it. I was walking home from a friend's house one night back to my place. I didn't have a car at the time, so I was traveling by foot on this night. It was pouring down rain and dark since it was later at night. My friend and I live in town, so we're not that far away from each other. I was walking alongside the sidewalk, and it was pouring down rain like I said. I had heard some strange noises coming from a little ways down the street. It sounded like whatever it was coming from a cave or something. I started looking around and thought how strange it was. Just then, something started to come out from the storm drain, up just a little ways. I thought it was going to be an alligator, so I was startled and I stopped. Whatever this was big. It looked like a big, slimy, white blob with arms pulling itself out of the sewers. It had fully pulled itself out in just a few seconds and then looked up right at me. Here I am in the pouring rain, about 30 feet away from some government-failed monstrosity that just pulled itself out of the depths of the sewers. I was not able to make out any facial distinctions or features other than it looked blank. It quickly turned itself around and waddled its way back down into the sewer drain. I sat there for a second, wondering what the hell I just saw, and then sprinted back to my house. For a while, I convinced myself I just dreamed it all and couldn't believe it, but I really did see this thing. It's weird because I didn't see any legs. It looked like a white blob with arms and a neck and a head without a face. I don't know what the hell it was, but it creeps me out that it lived in the sewers. It was larger too, but was able to squeeze its way in and out of the sewer drain. Hello. First and foremost, I must relay the need for me to remain totally anonymous. After the recent threats received to my neighbor, I don't want any part to play in this game of theirs. However, I want those out there to know there's more going on than what people are being led to believe. Let me get into a little more. My neighbor, who I'm close with and have known for years, lives about a quarter-mile away. We both have decent-sized property with a lot of acreage and a lot of woods. Recently, my neighbor has been experiencing some weird things on his property, so to speak. Seeing a weird white animal running around his property at night, or something bizarre like that. He wasn't sure what it was. He decided to set up trail cams all over. I helped him out, and I think all in all, we set up about 9. It wasn't even 5 or 6 days later, he decided to check them. A lot of the usual, a mountain lion, a bunch of deer here and there, a couple of coons and some possums. Nothing too out of the ordinary, except when he came across one picture. He showed it to me and said, "What is this thing?" It looked like an all-white human, naked and running on all fours. It had longer arms and claws at the end of it, and it looked like it had teeth like a lion. It looked like something out of someone's nightmare. I told him I've never seen anything like that, and maybe he could share it around to find out what it was. Apparently, the very next day, there were black SUVs all over his property, and men in suits interrogating him and asking him all sorts of questions. They confiscated all of his trail cams, his computer, his SD cards, and other miscellaneous items. They threatened him if he ever talked about it with anyone, they would come back for him and make him disappear. I was able to watch this from afar as I was near his property at the time. I immediately asked what had happened, and he told me everything I just told you. I don't know what to make of this. He was as white as a ghost and doesn't even know what to do. Who were all the black SUVs, and why were there men in suits around his property and interrogating him? Is it because of this creature he got on his SD card? Something is going on, and I'm gonna do something and investigate myself. This happened to me back in 1989 when I was at a family party just before Thanksgiving. I remember it was snowy and already pretty cold out. I was at my cousin's house who had lived out in the boonies in Pennsylvania. Me, him, and a bunch of buddies and other family were having a gay old time. I, of course, was the chosen one to be the designated driver for that night, as several of us had to carpool and work the next morning. Everyone but me got pretty trashed, and so I spent a good portion of the night smoking cigarettes out on the cold porch to avoid all the drunken racket. It was getting close to around 11 p.m. I remember going inside and telling some of my buddies we needed to head out in a few, and so I was going to go to the car and go get it started and get it warmed up. I grab my keys off the counter and I make my way outside towards my car, which is parked at the end of the driveway. There's not really any light but the porch light, which is about 20 or 30 feet away. As I approach my car, maybe within 10 feet, I'm startled as this massive, dark, hairy, what I can only describe as a man stood up from behind my car and stared at me. Then it turned around and walked off into the woods that were across the street from his driveway. I couldn't stop screaming at the time, and I bolted back into the house. I told everyone inside, and they all thought I was joking at first, but could tell I was hyperventilating and on the verge of a breakdown. I've never believed in Bigfoot or any of that, but that's my only guess as to what this could have been. I remember when it stared at me, I couldn't really make out any eyes since its eyes were dark like a gorilla, but it had a very Neanderthal-looking face with leathery skin and a thick coat of hair covering its entire body. It was humongous, at least 8 feet tall, easily. I didn't smell anything, and I don't know what it was doing behind my car. This happened to me when I was just a little boy. My parents used to own a ranch in northeastern Texas. I remember getting up one morning to my pa whooping and hollering and having a conniption outside. Several of our cattle were dead. I remember seeing 2 big holes on the sides of their neck and thinking they were attacked by a vampire. It just so happens that growing up, vampires were my favorite monster, but at 6 years old, I knew they didn't exist. When I saw this for the first time, it really scared me. My dad didn't believe any of it and wasn't sure what to make of the thing. The eerie thing is, all the blood seemed to be drained from these cattle. What the hell does that out here? I remember that night, while laying in bed asleep, my dad was outside going crazy, shooting off his gun at God knows what, and swearing a whole bunch. I didn't think too much of it, but it did wake me up. Maybe just a bunch of coyotes? Who knows? The next morning, I asked him what he was shooting at, and he didn't really want to talk about it. He just told me the issue has been dealt with, and that's all I needed to know. I found this strange since my dad told me everything. He was an open book kind of man, and for him to be shutting down over this, something was off. At the time though, I didn't think much of it and carried on my way as a child. Now that I'm grown up and my dad has since passed, I truly believe we were dealing with a chupacabra of some sorts. Think about it. What else is going to be out here sucking the blood of these animals? And for him to be shooting off at something late at night, that wasn't him. Then for him to just not talk about it, what was he dealing with? Now that I'm in my 30s and I know about cryptids and chupacabras, I'm certain that's what came to terrorize my parents' ranch. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. If you like my content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. And stay tuned for more awesome Dogman videos. Tonight, you're all in for a special treat. I have a special guest joining me for just a few stories tonight of terror, mystery, and horror. Zach Baby TV will be joining me to help narrate with me. If you enjoy his stories, be sure to check out his channel and subscribe to him. You can view his channel in the description below. Now, I don't want to keep you all waiting. Let's jump in to what you really came for. This is 9 Scary Encounters with Creatures. Story 1. When I was a little boy, I used to live with my grandfather, who happened to live out in the countryside. My grandfather had a pretty big vegetable garden that he tended to daily, and of course, being his grandson, I would go out there every day and help. One day in the summer, he began noticing a lot of his vegetables would go missing. The weird part is, only individual plants would disappear, and not all of them, just the lowest hanging fruits and sometimes the entire plants themselves. At first, my grandfather was convinced it was mice or other rodents and vermin that were raiding his garden during the nighttime, and he wasn't catching it. So, to combat this, he set up a bunch of traps throughout his garden. Everything you can think of: rat traps, bear traps, animal traps, etc. Of course, this went on for days on end, with nothing turning up. He was getting very frustrated and confused to the point to where he was losing his mind at what was going on. Being fed up and having enough, he decided he would stay up one night, all night, to see if he could catch the culprit. On this particular night, Grandfather and I was roughly 12 at the time, made several cups of coffee and decided to stay up. It was pretty quiet most of the night, and we weren't guaranteed to catch anything at all. I do remember that, although I don't remember dozing off. But at some point, my grandfather woke me up in a panic, saying he could hear something or someone out in his garden. Him and I both rushed to the door. My grandfather had a spotlight that he was able to shine on the spot that he heard the noise. We didn't see anything at first, until we started noticing some eye shine. Whatever was in our garden decided to take off running. The spotlight was shined directly on the area, and at this point, we were able to follow whatever it was out of the garden. My grandfather and I are shocked by what we saw. It honestly looked like a little gremlin, if I've ever seen one. It was roughly 1 to 2 feet tall, brownish darkish skin, weird looking ears that sat on top of its head, and a really ugly face. If there was ever such thing as a real life goblin, this was it. It didn't make any noise, but it bolted out of his garden pretty quickly. My grandfather looked, and I asked him, "Papa, what is that thing?" He never did answer me, and we never did talk about it after that night. But after that, the problems ceased, and we never did see whatever that thing was ever again. Sometimes I wonder if there is such a thing as tiny creatures and goblins. I've heard other encounters with weird beings like this, although they've been pretty hard to come across. If any of you have any experiences with such a weird thing, reach out to me. Story 2.
I like the desert at night. They say it's dangerous to be out here, but I like it. It's good to sit by a campfire and drink a beer, out here where there isn't any noise or traffic. You can see all the stars because there aren't any electrical lights to chase them away. Sometimes the wind sings to you, but then somebody usually comes along and messes it all up somehow. Mostly it's drunks who want to beat you up because you're from the reservation. So when I hear pebbles shifting somewhere off to my left, the hair on the back of my neck starts to tingle and my hand inched a little closer to my Bowie knife. The figure that came walking out of the darkness didn't look very threatening. Just an old man wearing traditional Navajo clothing and leaning on a crooked walking stick as he shuffled quietly towards me. "Getting cold?" came the old man's voice, dry as the desert. I expected him to say more, but instead he just sat down across the campfire from me, laying the walking stick casually across his lap. There was something about him that made me uneasy, and my apprehension increased when his hand vanished into a leather pouch that hung from his belt. But he pulled forth only a crumpled pack of cigarettes, holding them slightly towards me. "Smoke?" "Sure," I replied as my nerves began to relax. When he tossed me the pack, I noticed there were only 2 cigarettes left inside. I took one and tossed the pack back to him. I held my chrome Zippo towards him, but he instead took a little wooden match from behind his ear, scraping it against a small gray rock that dangled from a leather cord worn around his neck. The sudden flare of light illuminated his ancient, weathered face, and his eyes seemed to sparkle eerily for a moment. Then he sat smoking silently. "Dangerous out here at night, you know." He spoke softly for a while. "Lots of things come out at night. Even things nobody believes in anymore. They still come around sometimes." I smiled a little. "You mean ghosts and goblins?" Maybe ghosts," he answered after considering it a moment. "Not goblins, I don't think. Not even sure what goblins are. But there are other things too. Things like skinwalkers. You know about them?" A sudden chill ran the length of my spine as the old man studied me quickly. Mom used to tell me stories about them when I was little," I mumbled. "Then you know what can happen," said the old man. "They take the shape of a man and wear the skin of a man, but they're really more like an animal underneath. They have powers too. Folks used to say only a Sherman could defeat them." He turned his attention to the campfire. His image seemed to ripple behind the waves of heat rising from the flames. Embers danced around him like angry red fairies. "Lots of other things out here too," he continued. "The Wendigo, the chupacabra, all sorts of things. They don't come around much anymore, but sometimes they do." Silence settled over us like a damp woolen blanket, the campfire seeming to begrudge us what little heat it was providing. The stars twinkling above seemed suddenly to be laughing silently, sharing some sinister joke amongst themselves. The thin slice of moon sank behind a lone cloud bank, as though unwilling to witness whatever might transpire. The beast attacked us without warning. I felt claws sinking into my back as a great weight fell upon me. Then it was gone, and I rose to see the old man falling backwards. Whatever was on top of him wasn't visible, but I could see jagged rips appearing in his clothing and in his flesh. Then suddenly he was thrusting the walking stick upward, and there was a terrible screeching sound. The creature fell backwards into the fire and became visible as it withered in the flames. I can't really describe it. Imagine a pale white maggot taller than a man, its bloated mushy body bristling with claw-like barbs. something like a mouth at one end and rows of shark-like teeth lining the inside. A clump of black eyes that seemed completely lifeless as it rose from the fire and again hurtled itself towards the old man. I'm not a hero. My brain was screaming for me to get out of there, just to run anywhere, to just get away. But then I heard the old man's screams, and I saw the empty cigarette pack lying crumpled on the ground, and something inside me stopped shaking and started getting angry instead. I tore away my clothes and then tore away my skin as well, revealing my true form. I was springing towards the ugly monstrosity before I really had time to think about it, which is probably just as well. As I struggled with the creature, attacking savagely with my own teeth and claws, I caught a glimpse of the old man rising weakly to his feet. His walking stick was beginning to glow faintly, casting an eerie green light upon him as he moved towards. He plunged the stick deep into the creature's side. The thing stopped biting at my face and made that deafening screeching sound again. But this time, it didn't stop screeching for a long time. I'm not sure if it died or just went someplace else where it faded down from view. I hope it died. The old man reached down to recover his walking stick from where it had fallen, watching me carefully. It's difficult for me to speak when I'm in my true form, but I can manage it if I concentrate.
What was it?
I managed to ask.
No idea,
he answered with a puzzled frown. We stood staring at one another for a moment.
You're gonna need a new shirt,
I pronounced quietly, pointing a talon to his torn and ruined clothing.
That's nothing,
he chuckled.
You're gonna need a new skin.
But then his smile faded. His grip tightened on the walking stick as he studied me in the campfire's flickering light.
You can relax,
I lisped.
Shaman skin won't work on me.
His eyes drifted uncertainly to his walking stick.
Still,
he said softly,
I'm supposed to try to destroy you. Yep,
I hissed.
Same here, old man.
We continued staring uneasily at one another for a moment longer. Then the old man's smile slowly returned.
Crazy world, ain't it? Crazy world,
I agreed. As he turned to go, I glanced around and saw the shredded remains of my jacket. Snagging it up with a claw, I turned back towards the old man, shuffling away into the darkness.
Hey, Pops,
I called quietly, tossing him the fresh pack of cigarettes that had been in my jacket pocket. I think I managed something like a human smile. He nodded thanks and then vanished into the desert night. I sat back down beside my campfire. A million stars twinkled overhead. They say it's dangerous being out here alone in the desert, but I like it. Sometimes the wind sings to you, and all you have to do is sing back.
Story 3. This happened to me when I was roughly only 8 years old. I remember waking up one night in the middle of the night to go and get some water. I got up out of my bed and opened my door to go down the hallway. Now, let me give you a little bit of info about the layout of my house. Once you get out of my room, you go down the hallway quite a ways, and to the right is the bathroom, and a little bit past that is the living room, followed by the kitchen, followed by another hallway that leads to my parents' place. I stepped out to the hallway, and that's when I froze. Staring at me from not even 10 feet away were these red, glowing eyes. They looked so menacing and evil, and that's right when I heard a deep growl. I was so terrified, I pissed my pants and started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know what this was, or what had made its way into my house, but I knew I had to get away now. I quickly ran back into my bedroom and slammed the door shut. I then pushed my desk up against the door. I was going to let whatever was out there into my room. The last thing I remember is pulling the sheets up over my head and crying myself to sleep. The next thing I know, my dad is pounding on the door, asking me why the door was barricaded shut. It was morning time at this point, and I got up out of bed and moved my desk out of the way to answer the door. My dad was angry and confused as to why I had the door blocked off and my desk in front of it. I explained the situation to him and what happened to me last night. Of course, being a parent, he chalked it up to me having a nightmare or some sort of night terror, or me watching too many horror movies. I promise that what I experienced that night was real, and even as an adult, I look back and reflect and think that it was either paranormal, maybe even a demonic entity, or possibly an alien. I'm not sure what it was, but I hope I never experience it again. Story 4.
This past October, I had worked at a haunt, that is, a haunted attraction at a local theme park. I was pretty good at managing the big crowds. I really enjoyed it when the crowds would get smaller. The groups of 10 to 20 people were coming in to my attraction. During times when the crowds were thinning like that, I loved scaring them with stories and legends I knew about. And one of my favorite legends to tell them were the Skinwalker legends. I would start off greeting the group and tempting them with an offer to tell them a story, asking them if they would like to hear a local legend, as we live in the desert and this haunt was tucked away in the heart of miles of desert land. When they all would agree, I would start my tale. Some of you may know about skinwalkers, and for those of you that do, you may know that native Navajo and Hopi tribes are fearful to even speak of this creature or to even utter its name. These monsters span from southern Arizona all through the New Mexico and the Mexican border, and across the lands of the native peoples, and Navajo believe them to be witches or shaman, an evil being with the supernatural power to shapeshift, typically by wearing the skin or masks of the animals they wish to walk as, a practice which is looked down upon by the Navajo people. This power is gained after killing a close relative or sibling, and imbues the being with many dark powers. The animal they appear as, however, always looks wrong. A deer or coyote that stands on its hind legs and walks as a man does, a crow or owl that has a face or eyes that look too human to belong to an animal they mimic, and that glow red in the moonlight. In all the legends, it says there is always one sure way to identify a skinwalker. A skinwalker, no matter what, will never be able to move as the creature it appears as in its animal form. Skinwalkers are able to do other things as well. They can move at seemingly impossible speeds. They can mimic the voice of people, crying babies, your friends or loved ones' voices that you would trust. They will lure you out into the woods or into the pitch black of the nighttime desert. And once they have you isolated and you lay your eyes upon their face, It is said you will die an agonizing death. Skinwalkers can curse people and cause them great suffering. Often, it is said they use a mixture that some call corpse powder when seen in their human form, which turns your tongue black and causes violent convulsions until you die. The worst part about skinwalkers, the reason native people dare not speak of it, it is believed that a skinwalker is capable of reading your minds, and the more aware of them you are, the more aware they become of you. So try not to think about it, but if on your ride home you see a coyote in your path, or hear the drums of native people echoing loudly through the darkness, take care and drive quickly, and pray it will not pursue you. And I would, almost always, be met with looks of horror and fear. It was my absolute favorite tale to tell for this reason. I would tell this story over and over to as many groups as I could. It wasn't a good idea to talk about them. I would say as much with each re-encounter of the legend, and much less in the middle of the desert, surrounded by inky blackness that engulfed everything the park's lights didn't illuminate. But I did. I felt safe. Nothing would happen to me. It was just a legend. That was until I drove home after my shift, around 1 in the morning, after a night of telling this particular story dozens of times to guests. As I drove through the twists and turns of the pitch-black mountainous desert road I traveled each night to go home, my high beams on, penetrating the darkness just enough for me to see the road and the first layer of brush on either side of it. My headlights shone on an animal. A coyote. At first, I thought it had just been the angle of the lights that hit it that made it appear to have no tail, but as I continued driving, I encountered the animal again. 3 times, each within several miles of each sighting. A distance any normal animal wouldn't be able to make, especially when running against the car going 65 miles per hour for most of the journey. Each time I would scan the road for wildlife and I would see it. There, just outside of the darkness, the coyote with no tail, staring at me from the side of the road. My stomach turned a bit, and I breathed deep, trying to tell myself I was just imagining things. The coyotes had tails, and none of them were the same animal. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But I knew deep down I was lying to myself. I knew I was wrong. I knew it was real, and it was terrifying. I'm relieved to say I made it home safely that night, but still, every now and then when I drive through the desert in the darkness of night, or glance out into my bedroom window into the blackness, I can see that coyote, that skinwalker. I hope it never decides I know too much, but I think that maybe, just maybe, it visits me to remind me of its presence, that it wants me to continue telling this story, to continue spreading awareness of their presence, so that it may claim lives to those who are the weak-minded enough to fall prey to it. And now that you know the story, maybe it will come after you.
Story 5. I'm a retired forest ranger. Back in the 1980s, I used to work in all sorts of different parts in the US that were remote positions. I traveled and worked stationary many different times in my career. I've had a wide variety of strange occurrences happen to me and to some of my coworkers working out in the wilderness. One time, in particular, I was working about 10 to 15 miles outside of Trout Lake in Washington State. This area is right next to a national forest and is pretty much out in the boonies, right upside Mount Adams. One particular night, I was driving down a logging road traveling to my next location, and I must have driven over something sharp because my right tire blew out. Now, I just pulled over and started to do what you do when you have a flat. I'm in the middle of taking off the tire, and I began to get a peculiar feeling that I was being watched. I quickly brushed it off as I'm an experienced outdoorsman, and there's really nothing out there that scares me, so I continued to do what I do. I remember I had just gotten the flat tire off when I start to notice little rocks being pelted at me in my vehicle. I thought it was the strangest thing. I also noticed the woods were pretty silent, and this was dead set in the middle of August. It was a pretty hot day out, and the forest is usually pretty alive with bugs and other noise. But not tonight. It was eerily quiet. After being pelted with rocks, it was enough for me to quickly get the tire on and get the hell out of Dodge. I flew out of there faster than you could imagine. I'm not sure if it was somebody playing tricks on me or what, but there's no reason anybody should be out there in the middle of the woods that late at night without saying anything, especially to a park ranger. I've told this story to my coworkers and some other close friends of mine. Some of them told me I'm crazy and that it was probably just some deranged camper, while others told me it could possibly have been a Bigfoot. I'm not really a believer in that stuff, so I'm not sure what it was, but make it what you will. All I have is the experience to share for you. Story 6. This encounter happened to my father back in 1972. My dad has since passed away, but he told me this story multiple times growing up, and it still freaks me out. My dad at the time was in his early 20s, working the night shift at some janky warehouse job. Well, it was more like a swing shift kind of thing. He was working like 6 to 7 to 2 or 3 in the morning, I really don't remember. He wasn't there for long. Anyway, he was driving home one night around 2 or 3 in the morning, and his car had broken down. I think his transmission was going out. Out where he was, there was literally nothing around for miles. Nothing. No cars, no phone booth, nothing. So he had to leave his car and walk for a few miles to the nearest house just so he can get on the phone to contact one of his buddies. This was one of those lone, straight, desolate roads. It was lightly raining outside, and it was still a little bit chilly from the winter. I think he told me it was around March or April, if I remember correctly. I do remember him telling me that he was about a mile or so into the walk when things got a little strange. Since there were really no streetlights close by, and both sides of the road were pitch black, since he's in the middle of nowhere, he all of a sudden heard this rushing sound, as if something humongous, like the size of a buffalo or a moose, was rushing towards him as fast as it could. This scared him to death, and he starts sprinting as fast as he could. But as soon as he starts sprinting, whatever it was running after him stopped dead. He told me he rushed for a little bit longer, and he saw a streetlight in the distance, and he started walking towards it. Nothing happened. He began walking more and more for a few more moments. Nothing. He stood there, waiting to hear anything. Nothing. Just silence in the light rain of the night. So he continued walking towards the streetlight, and that's when whatever it was sprinted and ran at him as fast as it could from behind him. He said it sounded so loud, and whatever it was on all fours. He sprinted as fast as he could underneath that streetlight, but as soon as he hit that streetlight, it stopped. He was pretty terrified at that point, and wasn't really sure what else to do. He kept trekking forward more and eventually found a house where he was able to phone one of his buddies to come pick him up. What scares me is that in the area that he was, there was no livestock or any animal that could have been that large that could have chased him away like that. He told me that as soon as he got to this person's house to use their phone, he was as pale as a ghost and was practically banging on their door to let him in, and that something was chasing him. Of course, the people who answered the door didn't believe him and almost threatened to call the police until he explained himself. I, to this day, don't really know what my dad for sure experienced, and I don't know if I would ever want to find out. Story 7.
Beginning in the early April 1986, the people in and around the little-known Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, dark, and mutated man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. People affected by this phenomena experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls, and first-hand encounters with this winged beast, which became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. Reports of these strange happenings continued to increase until the morning of April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic stream explosion that resulted in a fire which caused a series of additional explosions followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located near Pripyat, Ukraine, Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout, which drifted over parts of the Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, and UK. Ireland and Eastern North America, large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated, resulting in the excavation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, is considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. Following the meltdown, the subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched to the scene, equipped with special firefighting gear. These helicopters circled the plant, dropping clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals onto the burning facility. Most of the fire was put out by 5 a.m., with the fire burning within Reactor 4 continuing to blaze for several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, assuming that it was all simple an electrical fire, and received massive overdoses of radiation, leading to many of their deaths, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravec, who died on May 9, 1986. The workers who survived the initial blast and fire, but would rather die of radiation poisoning, claim to have been witnessed what has been described as a large black bird-like creature with a 20-foot wingspan gliding through and swirling plumes of irradiated smoke pouring from the reactor. No further sightings of the Black Bird of Chernobyl were reported after the Chernobyl disaster, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers of the plant during the days leading up to the disaster. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that the Black Bird of Chernobyl may have been the same creature spotted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, leading up to the collapse of the Silver Bridge of December 15, 1968. Investigators have suggested that the appearance of this creature is an omen of disasters to come in the area in which it shows itself. The physical description of both the Black Bird of Chernobyl and the Mothman and creature sightings in West Virginia are very similar, and the reports of nightmares and threatening phone calls leading up to these disasters are shared in both cases. A second, less accepted theory suggests that the Black Bird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of a black stork, an endangered species in southern Eurasia. The black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and has the wingspan of nearly 6 feet. This theory, however, fails to take into account the menacing phone calls and the disturbing nightmares. Also, The physical description given by the majority of the eyewitnesses who actually saw the black bird of Chernobyl does not in any way match the physical appearance of the black stork. Both the black bird and Chernobyl and the Mothman have not been sighted since their respective disasters, leaving us with many unanswered questions. All we can do is wait for the beast to show itself again and give us the chance to figure out what it may be. Unfortunately, it would appear that for this creature to show up again, we will have to anticipate some form of disaster in the area it has selected to appear.
Story 8. In June of 2004, 2 Hispanic men were on their way back from working a long day and were traversing a 2-lane highway. It was roughly in the evening time, and as the 2 men in the truck saw what they can only describe as a man-bat kind of creature flying straight at their vehicle and then right up in the air. One of the men described the creature as terrifying and having a face that looked demonic. Half human, half bat is the best he could describe it. It had piercing red eyes and screeched as it flew up into the air. Both witnesses stated the wingspan to be roughly 12 to 15 feet in length, and it was also pretty muscular from the way they had seen it. Since it flew directly at them, their headlights illuminated most of the beast and were able to get a decent look at it, even if it only was for a few seconds before it shot up into the air. They said it had sharp appendage-like claws on its wings and was fairly tall. They estimated roughly 9 to 12 feet. After the encounter, both men became violently ill for the next 2 weeks to come, and even missed enough work for both of them to lose their jobs, all while being in the hospital. What's frightening about this encounter is that there's a very similar encounter that occurred. Almost the same thing happened to a father and son just 2 years later in September, where they would see the same bat creature in almost the same fashion. It just goes to show you, Wisconsin is home to many devilish creatures. Story 9. In Pitt Lake, there have been numerous reports of Bigfoot sightings for years and years, dating back to even before the 1900s. Many Sasquatch sightings occur near and on creeks that all feed into the lake. Back in the 70s, there was a supposed report of a couple of loggers who were chased out of a nearby area by a supposed family of Bigfoots throwing logs, rocks, and other large objects at them. Not even many years later, a couple of other loggers had been reported missing in the area, not long after starting their work. There have been many other sightings of all sorts of howls, wood knocks, and other bizarre, unexplainable noises that occur at all times of the night. More recently, hikers had reported smelling rotting meat smells in certain areas, and staying away from the entire area in general. The most notorious, though, is when a foreman of one of the logging companies encountered a family of Bigfoot firsthand, and managed to escape without dying. He reported that there were several gigantic hairy humanoids who were extremely aggressive and attempted to bluff charge him out of the woods he was in, and he managed to make it out. He estimated them to be roughly 9 to 10 feet tall and to be massively built. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of strange encounters all throughout the British Columbia and the likes. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Also, if you enjoyed Zach's content, be sure to check out his channel below and subscribe to him. His content is excellent. Keep your eyes peeled, everyone, for I have many more great stories to tell you that will literally make your skin crawl. Stay tuned. Some people have the misfortune of seeing creatures beyond their wildest nightmares. Whether it's shadow beings looking to terrify you, or beasts of the wilderness that peek into your windows at night, there's no escaping from seeing the horrors that exist in this world. Tonight, we're going to cover 10 true encounters with unknown beings. So sit back, relax, and stay scared. Story 1: The Insectoid. I often wonder if all of us have been abducted at one time or another, but only a few of us can remember. I had a unique experience as a child, but I cannot say I was ever abducted. When I was 4 years old, we lived in a small wartime home in Hamilton, Ontario, on what we call the mountain, but it's actually just a slope. We had the windows open in the house, as air conditioners were not really the standard in 1968. It was sweltering that night. I shared a room with my brother and sister. I woke up during the night and looked out the window into the backyard, and in front of a bush, about 8 feet away, was a small, thin creature with shiny black skin. It looked like a little girl, but at the same time, it looked like an insect. It was crouched on its legs and was leaning forward with one hand on the ground and was looking directly at me. It had what looked like thin antennas, or like needles sticking out from each side of its head, and one on top. That's all I remember, and when I told my mom, she said it was a dream. We moved to Caledonia, in no small house, in 1972. I now slept in my room on the second floor. My dad and I did a project where we made a crystal radio. Some people may remember this kit from Radio Shack. I woke up one night in the summer with the windows open. I looked down into the backyard. I saw the antenna for my radio stretched across the yard, but below that, there it is again on the edge of the grass, crouched down next to the patio under my window. My mother said it was a dream. A few years later, we moved again, so my dad did not have to go far from work to Stony Creek, Ontario. I was now about 15 years old, and I got up in the night and looked out my window and saw it again crouched on the edge of the sidewalk and the grass in the front of the house. This time, I went outside to look, and it was there. I walked to them, and it did not make any noise. It just looked at me. It was all black with large black eyes. I then remember waking up and don't remember going back inside. I wrote it off to a dream. Many years later, I am not sure these were just dreams. There was an article where a UFO crashed in either Mexico or South America, and the sketches that the people made looked like my dream creature without the antenna, and the pictures showed red eyes, not black. The red eyes may just have been to jazz up the story. It makes me think though, has anyone else had anything like this happen to them? Story 2: The Glowing Thing. When I was a kid, about 5 to 6 years old, I had regular encounters with shadow people, especially at night, to the point where I would hate going to the bathroom alone at night, because they would just literally line the walls of the hallway from my room to the bathroom. They would just stare at me, despite having no facial features at all. With the shadow people, though, I never felt threatened, just unnerved. One night, I had to go to the bathroom, and my parents were asleep, so I was stuck going alone. I didn't see any shadow people that night, but I still kept my head down and walked quickly. As a kid, I also had anxiety about closed doors for some reason, so I left the door slightly open. I was just about to get up and go when the door slowly opened. I could hear footsteps down the hall, like someone with shoes on was shuffling on the floor, and I felt a powerful feeling of dread. I saw a faint blue turquoise glowing light from the end of the hallway, and then I saw a man walking sideways down the hall. He was walking like this, but way more smoothly, like he was gliding effortlessly, like it was the way he always walked. He was smiling and facing into the bathroom. He had brown hair, plastic-like, kind of like a Ken doll, and he was wearing jeans and a turquoise button-up shirt. His arms were out at his sides. Strangely, he didn't seem fully there. His form sort of flickered with bits of color, like when you rub your eyes and see random colorful flashes. But he never disappeared or anything. He was very much real. I panicked and looked away and was just stuck sitting there, frozen until I couldn't hear his shuffling anymore. I looked down the hallway and he was gone, and I ran back to my room. I never told anyone for years, and I don't know why. I don't even think I told my best friend or brought him up when people were sharing ghost stories. Then, one day, my mom and I were out walking the dog, and the topic of how haunted our old house was came up. She told me that she had a lot of weird dreams there, but one in particular stood out to her. In the dream, she was in bed, and she was very aware that a bunch of people were in the house, and that she wanted them out. Then, she saw the same man walking the same way down the hallway. She got the same feeling of dread and wanted him gone as soon as possible. She didn't tell anyone about him, not my dad, not her sister, and she doesn't even know why either. When she told me about this, I almost started crying, and I felt a really intense feeling of dread. I still don't know why, but when I talk about him, I get choked up and I feel terrified, even though I've never seen him since. I don't know what he is or if he still exists, but neither of us had told anyone about him until that day. I've heard recently that some people report similar feelings of intense emotion when talking about aliens. If anybody knows what I could be dealing with, I would love some insight. Story 3: The Tree People. One Saturday in 2008, I had the strangest encounter of my life. My cousin Ann and I were exploring the woods of Turner, Maine. My grandmother always told of the tree people that she saw there as a child. I had never seen or heard of them since I lived in Maine, so I was very skeptical that they were there. My iPod was stuffed in my pocket, and Anne was studying everything we passed. She did believe all of Grandma's stories, until we came to this orange fence in the middle of the woods. And the funny thing is, we did own all of this land. Mom and Dad would have heard about this. "Come on, let's jump over it," exclaimed Anne. She was overly excited. I sighed, but we made our way over the fence. As soon as we were over it, I felt like someone was following us. The hair on my back was standing up, and I didn't know why. I turned around to look back, but no one was there. Anne seemed fine, like she went here all the time. We were so far from that fence, my comfort zone. At one time, I was sure I saw 2 yellow-orange eyes just like the color of the wall. Super creepy. Suddenly, Anne yelped out, "What the hell is that?" I turned and saw a skinny, slimy, brown creature staring at us. It had the same eyes that I'd seen earlier. It reminded me of a walking piece of bark, to be honest. I was frozen. This thing made the hair on my head stand up. It made an awful scream that made my eardrums burst. I couldn't hear a thing for 5 minutes. The bark creature ran at such a speed that it was just a brown blur. Anne and I just stood there in shock, and we made a beeline for the house. The next evening, we did go out again, but the orange-yellow fence was gone. The questions were ringing in my head. Had we really encountered the dwelling tree people? Where could the giant fence have gone? I knew I wasn't dreaming because Anne remembers it too. I'll never venture that far into the woods ever again. Story 4: The Dark Walker. When I was a boy, my mother and I lived with my grandfather, who had a farmhouse in a rural location in southwestern Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a handyman who also worked a small blacksmith shop in his old barn. My grandmother had died before I was born, and my father had also passed away while serving overseas in the U.S. Army. Beginning in the summer of 1946, we noticed strange howling sounds coming from the woods that surrounded the property. The activity came at night and was very frightening when the howling came close. The sounds didn't seem to bother my grandfather, though. My mother and I were shaken when it would begin. The sounds continued off and on for about a year, but we never noticed any animals. My grandfather and I would hunt for deer and squirrel in the woods during the colder months, but we never saw signs of unusual animal activity. One late afternoon in the spring of 1947, I was helping my grandfather in his shop when I noticed something moving around the edge of the woods near an area whereby grandfather had a few junk cars and other items. It was about 200 feet from our location, but I clearly noticed someone or something moving around. I told my grandfather to look. He walked to the door, lit his tobacco pipe, and didn't say a thing. After a minute or two, he turned around and got back to work. About that time, this thing moved into the woods and disappeared. I couldn't judge how big it was, but it sort of reminded me of a magazine picture I had seen of a giant ape that was said to inhabit the Asian jungles. Later that evening, I told my mother what I had seen. She was shocked because she knew I wouldn't lie to her and that the howling sounds had been closer lately. I also told her of my grandfather's response when I pointed the creature out to him. She immediately stood up and walked into the sitting room to ask my grandfather what it was. He started to shake his head slowly and said that he was hoping that we wouldn't see it because he was worried we would be and be scared and leave him. After assuring him that we'd never leave him, my mother again insisted that he tell us what this thing was. He looked away, took a deep breath, and said, "It's a dark walker," and said that it lived in the woods for many years. He said the native Indians called it stone spirit, and they thought it was an evil spirit who would appear when someone was about to die. The last time he had seen the dark walker was the night before my grandmother had died. My mother was skeptical of the harbinger of death angle, but she sensed that there was something unnatural nearby. The howling continued each night, though we hadn't seen any signs of the dark walker. One warm evening, we were sitting out on the back porch. There were a few howls, but it seemed like the sounds were even further away. We were listening to the radio when all at once my grandfather stood up and looked out towards the barn. He turned to me and said, "John, go get my pistol and ammo. Hurry now." I ran to the sitting room and grabbed the revolver and a handful of bullets from the old steamer trunk. I handed it to him and watched him load the gun. He then picked up a hatchet and slid it in his pants belt. "Now both of you, get into the house now." We were in the kitchen looking through the screen door and watched my grandfather stroll towards the barn. We saw him turn and walk out of sight into the dark. I decided to grab my shotgun and keep it nearby. After a minute or so, we heard 3 gunshots, and a blood-curdling scream emanates from the woods near the barn. Then it suddenly stopped, and there was complete quiet. We were frozen and wondering if we should go look for my grandfather. A few seconds later, we heard him yell, "Stay in the house until I come back." I heard the pickup truck start. I looked out the storage room window and saw my grandfather drive to the back of the barn and park. Several minutes later, he backed up and drove by the side of the house out onto the road. I could see that there was something in the back covered up with a tarp. It was getting late, so my mother told me to go to bed. The next morning, I came downstairs and sat beside my grandfather, who was reading the newspaper and drinking a cup of coffee. My mother was sitting at the other end of the table, staring at my grandfather. Not long later, she said, "Well, Dad, tell him." My grandfather put the paper down and looked at me. "I killed the dark walker." And that was all he said. My mother told me not to tell anyone and that the matter was closed indefinitely. We never talked about it again after that. My grandfather lived another 15 years, and my mother stayed with him until his very dying day. When I grew older, I moved away and raised a family of my own. I would return home to visit each summer and never heard another howl. Story 5. The Chico, California Bigfoot. On Sunday, December 16th, my wife and I were driving through a residential area in Chico, California. It was around 11 p.m. We had been visiting a friend for the holidays. I'm not very familiar with the city, but at the time, we were on the Vallombrosa Avenue. On the left, there is a wooded park. We had just driven under the Golden State Highway overpass when suddenly, a large dark man-like creature leapt out from the woods onto the road. I quickly stopped the car as my tires screeched on the roadway. This creature was massive and had dark hair all over its body. I don't know how great the road is, but it was across 3 giant leaps. As it reached the north side of the way, it turned and looked directly at us. My wife was terrified and crouched down in her seat. I caught a brief golden-colored reflection from its eyes. I hit the accelerator quickly and continued driving. I had driven about 100 yards or so, and then noticed that either this creature was keeping pace with me, or that I passed another similar being on my left side, crouched down by the road. I still think that this was another creature, because it looked smaller in size than the beast I had witnessed previously. By this time, I was very concerned and extremely scared. I was hoping that there would be no traffic lights until we reached the turnoff to get onto the highway and get the hell out of there. Story 6. The Texas Werewolf. The following story happened to me in 2008, around 10 to 12 p.m. on the 29th. I, my friend Eric, sister, and her boyfriend had been hanging out smoking a few J's at a friend's house on Bicentennial. I was dropping off my sister's boyfriend, Ian, near Trenton Road, and as I was driving back south, I was talking to my sister that was sitting on the passenger seat and friend that was in the back seat of my Chevy Blazer, but he was leaning forward in between my sister and me. As I was approaching Nolena, there was a red sedan driving in front of me, and we were both going at a steady 35 to 40 miles an hour. But right before I was nearing Walmart, the guy driving in front of me kept going slow until he made a complete stop on the road. I was mainly staring at the guy's taillights while we were driving, but when he made the stop, I said, "What the hell is this guy doing?" I looked at my sister and my friend, and they just stared frozen straight. The guy in front of me hauled ass, and my sister said, "Oh my God, did you see that?" As she started tearing up next to me. My friend yelled, "Dude, what the hell was that thing?" And we kept saying, What are you guys talking about?" My sister kept yelling at me to drive faster, but I was just confused about what the hell had just happened. Well, as the week went by and I got the full details about what happened back there, and apparently as we were approaching Walmart, there was this huge dog that looked like a pitch black Great Dane running across the street from east to west across 29th Street. Apparently, when the red sedan spotted it, it was near 5 feet from the car, so he made a full stop. My sister said the dog stood straight up on 2 feet and walked slowly in front of both cars as he was staring directly at our Blazer. As soon as it crossed to the sidewalk on the other side, he, or it, got on all fours and took off heading west near Ware Road. I personally didn't see a thing, but my friend said it was almost identical to the werewolf in Harry Potter, the Prisoner of Azkaban. Tall, skinny, pitch black, and very fast. I drive by a few times there, but I haven't run into anything since. Story 7. The Birdman of Illinois. About 15 years ago, my son, who was about 12 at the time, told me a story one day after I picked him up from his after-school friend's house. They lived right by a creek, and the boys always walked down the road to the stream to play in it. One afternoon, at about 3:30 to 4 o'clock, when the sun is still high in the sky but starting its descent, so it was a little blinding in their eyes, they were walking down the road to the bridge over the creek when they noticed a man standing on the way. Now, this is from the mouth of a 12-year-old. He said this man was just standing there, looked like he was all in black, and he said it looked like the man didn't have a neck. They were a little puzzled but kept walking toward it. He said that is when it opened up its arms straight out, and it appeared to have wings. At that time, he said it just flapped them one time, like his arms went down one time, and he said it took off straight up in the air. They tried to see where it went, but said the sun was in his eyes. I don't know what to think at the time, but I just dismissed it as young boys and their stories. Well, when I started working nights, about 11 years ago, I started listening to Coast AM, and realized he had possibly seen the Mothman. Then he told me, when he was in his early 20s, he was hanging out with some friends from a surrounding small town. They were telling stories, and one of the guys started talking about seeing this giant flying birdman thing. This is the very same area where my son saw it. They were both excited to meet someone else that had also seen what they had. Story 8. The Chupacabra. I'm from New York and live in Queens. Walking back home, just got off the subway, had a beer at a bar a few blocks from home. One block is unusually long compared to the rest. Half is houses with front yards and steps, decent Polish middle-class neighborhood. Half of this block is the back end of a big sports field. It's a small sloping elevation at about 15 to 20 feet tall and about 6 meters in length. Big tall fence in front of this one. As soon as I turn into this corner, I see something that resembles a human figure. It was just a sign in the shape of a cross with an arrow pointing left. I thought, what a good night to get abducted by aliens. Chuckle and think about a music project I'm working on. I get past the houses and I'm walking by the back side of the field. I hear something. A raccoon? I heard scramble of small feet, ruffling of some leaves, and quiet chittering. I keep walking and I listen to a struggle. Wings flapping and a bird screeching in pain and grunts, and the sound followed me along, behind the fence. It was dark and I couldn't see anything. Some parts were blocked off with metal sheets. The sound was getting intense and loud. I could hear more animals dying, but also purring and cooing, like a pigeon or a cat chirping. Then there was a crow cawing and frogs singing, like if I were near a shallow swamp. I'm originally from South America and spent time in fields and whatnot, and it sounded like many, many, many animals. At first, I thought it was the chupacabra, but then I heard too many sounds, and I thought it could have been the devil. I even heard a woman moaning in the distance and a manly grunt next to me, and it followed me along the block. At the end of the neighborhood, there is an empty lot with another fence separating the two places. This thing went toward the top of the slope and climbed in the shortest wall. It took no time to catch up with me. I turned to the right in the corner, and this thing comes along, now snarling like a hungry dog. At the end of the empty lot, a raccoon jumps out through a hole in the fence. But the sound I could still hear as I walked away. It sounded angry. Mind you, this whole time I was terrified. I literally had chills running up and down my body. I moved out of the sidewalk and in the street, and I could still hear it. I'm finally out of this area and on my house's block. I'm shaking as I unlock the door. I genuinely do not know what I heard. Story 9. The Kenosha Wolfman. I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where werewolves have been sighted for centuries. I was walking back in May 2017, around 3 a.m., to a girlfriend's house. When I was close to her street, I looked behind a house with an alleyway in the back. I saw at first what I thought to be a huge deer, but when I looked closer, it was a big humanoid creature bent down sniffing. It turned its head. It was a wolf head. It was huge, so I looked even closer. It was a wolf-like man on 2 legs bent down. Did I tell you again how huge this thing was? I ran down the street because I did not want to go get its attention. In my mind, I wanted to go back, but something told me not to. Story 10. I don't know what this thing is. So, I don't know a lot about this sort of thing. Actually, I don't know anything. I just found this today and wanted to be able to share this with all of you. I've had well over 30 encounters with this thing, and I'm only 15, so I do believe. Anyway, I'll get on to this one. So about 2 years ago, I was playing the most recent Call of Duty campaign, and it was only 6 in the afternoon. But it was dark out because it was winter at the time. Now I'm in my room, sitting on a beanbag on the bottom of my bed, which is on top of the beanbag, which is on top of the bed, so this will be important. And my stepmother's sister is downstairs, and my bedroom door is open at this point. She walks past my room to go to the toilet, and as she steps out, she says, "Hi, Darren." Now, Darren is my dad's name, but he's not there. And so I say, "Dad's not here, what do you mean?" And she says she saw a humanoid figure sat next to me on the bed, but its legs were resting on the floor, knees bent, and he had long legs, and his head was the level height with me, who was sitting on a bed and a beanbag. Obviously, I noped the hell out of there, scared to even go in my room because this thing is tall, but I had yet to even see it. And then in the nighttime, I obviously have to go to sleep, so I go back to my room about 1 a.m., and I go to sleep with my TV on, so there's light in my room. I wake up at roughly 5 a.m. with an awful headache, and I look around my room. Nothing. A sigh of relief leaves me. But then I see it. Stood in one of the places that I didn't look. Literally, the height from the floor to the ceiling, and a little bit more as it was bent over because there wasn't enough room. It was all black. That black I couldn't even comprehend. Its face was entirely black, but I could see facial features somehow. Its eyes were as black as its skin, and its smile was terrifying. I stopped doing everything and just stared at it. Nothing happens for what felt like hours, although in real life it was about 12 minutes. It starts moving its head from side to side, sort of like a dog listening to a high-pitched sound, and then it seems to just disappear into the smoke and completely go. Not like a cartoon or movie though. Every time I tell someone about it on that night, I've seen it about 12 to 13 times, so it doesn't scare me as much as it should now. I've picked up more and more of its features, like notably the fact that it has no hands or feet, just perfect stumps, which is just downright terrifying. The most recent time I tried to touch it, as it doesn't go for a good 10 minutes, and I was within a meter. So far it has no ill intentions. At first, my hand went straight through it, only I couldn't see my hand as it touched, as it was absorbed by the darkness. I take my hand out and feel it a second time, noticing my hand becomes very warm. Then I move something substantial, as if right in the middle of it, almost like a spine but less spiky, but I'm just going off of what I could feel here. If anyone could tell me what the hell this thing is, or what I could do to stop it. It only seems to appear when I tell people, and it randomly shows up. Of course, nobody believes me, and it's driving me to the edge of insanity.